Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
And I'm Jonna Johnson.
Pass around the virtual donuts and join us for our weekly sprint across the IT news landscape. Today we're going to cover a Fortinet data loss, AT&T knocking out Microsoft services, new features in Juniper Apstra, some quantum entanglement space networking, and more networking and IT news. We're sponsored today by the AutoCon conference. You can join the packet pushers at the AutoCon 2 conference this November in Denver, Colorado. Registration's open at www.networkautomation.forum. AutoCon's a new conference. It's dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art in network automation. It's bringing together practitioners, experts, and a few vendor sponsors to facilitate conversations and let you swap tips and tricks with your peers. There's also a full slate of technical workshops and presentations. You can see the full agenda and register at networkautomation.forum. That's for the AutoCon 2 conference, November 18th through the 22nd in Denver, Colorado, networkautomation.forum. We hope to see you there. All right, let's dive into the news. Security vendor Fortinet has confirmed that an attacker stole 440 gigabytes of customer data from a cloud repository. Bleeping Computer says it was a SharePoint server.
Yeah, which is kind of unfortunate for Fortinet and even less fortunate for its customers. I think one thing to keep an eye on is that Fortinet did not do a particularly good job talking about this. They sort of slowly confirmed it. They mentioned that it was an effort to extort Fortinet, but that Fortinet refused to pay the ransom.
Yeah.
But they won't say what kind of data was stolen. They just noted that, quote, the incident did not involve any data encryption, deployment of ransomware, or access to Fortinet's corporate network, end quote.
Yeah. They also said they terminated the unauthorized access. They've communicated with customers, quote, as appropriate. I'm not sure what that means. And they've also hired external forensics firm and notified law enforcement and select cybersecurity agencies globally. Obviously, it's embarrassing if you're a security company to get breached. There's just no way around that. Yeah,
but I do have to highlight something. I don't want to be one-note Jonna, but I will highlight that there is a common theme in this breach that we've seen across a lot of different breaches, which is, drum roll here, but Microsoft. Once again, it's an Azure SharePoint scenario. Now, there's some question whether this was a configuration issue on Fortinet's side or whether it was an actual breach of Microsoft. But nonetheless, I think you guys are starting to see a common theme. And I do expect that there will be lots of negative follow-ups about this, and Jonna needs to stop bashing Microsoft. But I think more broadly, folks, we have to actually acknowledge the elephant in the room. This is, it's not funny, okay? And yes, Fortinet handled this badly. Yes, this shouldn't have happened. Yes, it's embarrassing for a security company to get breached, but let's look at the commonalities here, folks.
Yeah, I guess I will push back a little bit. We don't know the full details of what the breach was, whether this was an exploitable vulnerability or whether it was just, somebody set up a SharePoint instance in the cloud and did a really bad job of securing the permissions to that instance. Identity and access management, when you're using a public cloud service, is on the customer. There are the tools there that the cloud provider provides to you, but you're supposed to use them if you aren't doing it right. And again, we don't know what this was, but still that's on you. So,
well, it doesn't really matter because saying it's on you, but making it so possible to misconfigure something that data gets breached is still a flaw. And I'm reminded, just a side note, that many, many years ago when the automatic teller machines first came out, there was an ongoing problem, which was people would put their cards in, get their money, and walk away and leave their cards in the machine. And finally, the guys that made the ATMs went, hey, wait a minute, why don't we not spit out the money until the card has been removed from the machine, and we will completely get rid of that particular user error. So basically, you have to design things so it's not easy for users to set up an accidental misconfiguration that results in a vulnerability. That's generally what good IT companies do.
I mean, I guess it would be good if you're setting up a cloud resource and you do username and password 1, 2, 3, 4 that the system said, are you sure? That's really insecure. Or
just simply wouldn't accept it. I mean, come on. Right. That wouldn't pass muster in any SaaS system anywhere at this point.
Yes.
I really don't think you get to say, oh, well, maybe it was just a user misconfiguration error, because if something can be misconfigured that easily and it's so widespread, that's a problem all by itself.
Yeah. One thing I also want to note, I think Fortinet was smart not to pay the ransom. I feel like that would have been even worse. If you're a security company and you screw up on security, the best approach is to be as clear and transparent as you can. Any attempt to downplay or brush aside the incident will backfire. And I'm not saying Fortinet did that. Obviously, they could have maybe just paid the ransom and hoped it didn't get out, which I think would have been stupid. They didn't do that. So at least good on them for that.
Yeah, I think good on them for that, and hopefully, things will be locked up a little tighter going forward.
Yes.
Moving right along and talking about some common names in recent episodes, AT&T Network updates just made Azure and 365 inaccessible to a bunch of AT&T customers. This was an outage that lasted a couple of hours a few days back, and AT&T then issued reversions of the update to allow access to resume. For once, I'm actually not going to blame Microsoft on this one. This is AT&T customers not getting access to AT&T services. I will highlight, though, that there's something really bad about having an infrastructure in which one outage can take down access to your services. A single telco outage should not be able to take away access to core services. And that's why a lot of our clients are now considering or using multi-cloud services or network as a service. The challenge there, of course, is if they're all going to the same place, whether it's 365 or something else, that then becomes a single point of failure by itself. So, I guess the big takeaway for me is think about not only the degree to which your service is a single point of failure, but also the degree to which your access to that service is a single point of failure, and architect for resilience.
Yeah, something else to consider in your resiliency planning, if you're going to the cloud and you're doing all the right things, different availability zones, different regions, load balancing, all of that. And then it's the network infrastructure that takes out the access to the whole cloud. That's not something you can control, but again, got to do your due diligence, make sure they're doing things like multi-homing and have that resiliency set up that they're not entirely reliant on one service provider for access to their entire service.
Well, Juniper is now pumping up Apstra with even more AI. Woohoo! So Juniper's cloud applications, which are used to manage their data center switches, routers, and firewalls, are now getting 2 new services that include AI, impact analysis and service awareness. Those are the 2 services. Impact analysis is intended to connect network visible issues to user service impacts, so cause and impact or issue and impact, and service awareness folds application-related data into the network graph. What are your thoughts there, Drew?
Yeah, so Apstra is Juniper's data center management platform. It's an intent-based networking platform, but Juniper and being part of the Mist portfolio is also trying to bring AI into the platform. I'm not 100% sure why IBM needs AI. That's a different conversation. But I will say the 2 services they announced, App Service and Impact Analysis, make sense to me. Essentially, it's like I need to map how my network resources are connecting to applications and application flows. And then with Impact Analysis, I can see, this port is down and it's actually affecting apps A, B, and C. That can help me with troubleshooting, remediation, and so on. So that's definitely useful information. Based on the data sheet I found, I'm presuming that the service is getting its application data via flow records because there wasn't any information in any of the press release or the blog about how they were actually tying network resources to applications. It looks like they are using flow records, which makes sense. And one more thing, just tying that Fortinet story back to this, Mist AI is a cloud-based AI service. So some of your data center telemetry, if you're using Juniper Apstra, may be going into Juniper's cloud infrastructure, just something you should be aware of.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting, and I also think it's actually going at it from the right perspective. And I love how Juniper sort of keeps plugging away at this whole notion of you should be able to tell what's going on in the apps from looking at what's going across the network. Mm-hmm. So I think this is actually a fairly significant step forward, and I like it.
Yeah, good use of AI if you can help identify problems quickly and say, and not to mention this port going down is affecting apps A, B, and C. So be expecting to get those phone calls from the app owners.
And more Juniper news, or really sort of tangential Juniper news. HPE is going to the bond market to finance its Juniper buy. HP Enterprise is floating bonds in an effort to raise nearly half of the overall $14 billion acquisition with a range of short-term, 2-year and 3-year maturity, medium-term, 5, 7, and 10-year maturity, and long-term, 30-year maturity bonds. HPE hopes to raise about $6.5 billion. Some of the short and medium-term notes will have variable return rates, and the rest are fixed. Kind of interesting that it's going to be basically making a little bit of a stretch here to get Juniper, but I think it highlights what we've said in previous episodes, which is this has the potential to be a powerhouse of a company once everything gets integrated, if it can smooth out all the seams and the edges of the acquisition. So I can see why they're reaching to make it happen.
I mean, $6.5 billion is a lot of debt for a company of HP size. And frankly, I'm surprised this is just coming out now. I would have thought they would have kind of lined that up months and months ago when they actually bid for Juniper. But I'm not a finance guy. I don't know how these things work. So maybe they decided this was the time to do it.
Well, my thinking is sometimes you make a decision about what to do and then figure out how to pay for it later. It's not always a sane decision, but sometimes,
the CEO said we're doing it, and the finance team is like, okay, I guess we'll go find the money.
Financing is tactics, acquisition is strategy, and of course you can bad tactics can always bring down good strategy, but it is true that it is a little surprising that this popped up at this late date since it's supposed to be closing in a couple of months, right? Yeah,
that's the idea that this seems like it's going to be wrapped up maybe by the end of the year or early 2025, or at least they would like it to, because it seems like they're not running into, regulatory issues in terms of market competition. So,
and that could be the other thing too. Why throw too much money at something or lock up too much money until you're sure you can get through the regulatory hurdles?
That's a good point. See how that's going, and then go to the bond market. And I'm sure HP is confident that they can raise those bonds. And again, yes, $6.5 billion, a lot of money, but I agree. I think it's a good gamble for HPE to make on Juniper, despite some of the product overlap. I think if they have the right leadership in place, they can rectify those overlaps and make it work to their advantage. This could be good for HPE.
Yeah, and I think what we're both saying, just so there's no lack of clarity here, is this has the potential to be highly effective. We're not saying it will be, because there's a lot of tactical challenges between here and there.
Yes.
But strategically, it's not a dumb move. The integration of the two companies isn't a dumb move. It's actually a very good move. And if they can pull off the financing and it doesn't cause them too many hiccups, and and I just thought of another thing, Drew. I just realized probably at the time they made the bid, interest rates were a lot higher, and future money is,
also a good point. Yes.
That's like they could have been doing some complicated arbitrage in the background that said $1 today is worth, 80 cents tomorrow, or vice versa. No, not vice versa, but yeah. And that kind of said, okay, that we're gonna hold off on the financing until the last possible instant due to the changes in the interest rates.
Yes.
And again, neither of us are finance people, so take it for what it's worth.
Yes. If you have any insider finance background, you can hit us up, packetpushers.net/FU, the FUs for follow-up. But yeah, those are just our speculations, not being finance people. Quick break to tell you about our sponsor. The AutoCon 2 conference is November 18th through the 22nd in Denver, Colorado. Conference registration is open. You can find it at networkautomation.forum. AutoCon's a new conference dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art in network automation. It's going to bring together practitioners, experts, and some sponsors so you can talk about network automation, what people are actually doing. You can hear what your peers are doing in their networks, what solution providers are bringing to the table, what's happening with open source, and all things network automation. There's also a full slate of technical workshops and presentations from folks who are actually doing network automation and automation operations in the wild on production networks. So there's very worthwhile information. It's also a small conference, which means you can take in everything as opposed to being overwhelmed by everything that a lot of conferences are like. The Packet Pushers are also going to be there, and we'd love to say hello if you happen to be around. It's the forum for network automation. You can register at networkautomation.forum. That's networkautomation.forum to go find the registration. We hope to see you in Denver on November 18th through the 22nd. Back to the news. John, the last few weeks, we've been talking about companies like NVIDIA, HP, and Dell seeing their profits go up due to GPU sales as everybody and their brother builds out AI infrastructure. Apparently, that same build out is also helping sell more Ethernet switches. This is according to a new Dell'Oro report. The analyst firm says Ethernet switch sales rebounded in Q2 2024 after a decline in Q1, although it's only hitting certain market segments.
Well, and it's interesting which market segments those are. Those are the 200 gig to 800 gig switches, which of course are the ones that would be doing infrastructure for high performance computing clusters like AI. And I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, but one of the things that we found fascinating when we did our recent emerging technologies research study was that the same companies that are saying that they're moving workloads to the cloud are also saying they're bringing AI models in-house. So they're building up in-house. But just as Dell'Oro is reporting, it's almost a complete infrastructure refresh because it's very, very much high-end HPC infrastructure in-house versus run-of-the-mill data centers for, ordinary servers. And I think Del Oro was saying that, traditional front-end network gear is still being weighed down by what they call backlog normalization, inventory digestion, and your favorite term, spending optimization.
I love spending optimization. It sounds smart. Like the next time someone says I'm cheap, I'm going to say I'm not cheap. I am just optimizing my spend.
There you go.
So in this market segment, it's the 200, 800 gigs. So it's Arista, Huawei, NVIDIA seem to be the biggest winners here. And they also mentioned Celestica and other white box providers. And as you said, the traditional front end stuff, so lower port speeds, still kind of flat. This bump is coming from, looks like AI build out.
Exactly. It's the high end stuff.
And speaking of AI and Ethernet, NVIDIA quietly joined the Ultra Ethernet Consortium, or UEC. The UEC is a new quasi-standards body. It's trying to rejigger Ethernet to make it a suitable network transport for AI workloads. Obviously, NVIDIA owns InfiniBand, essentially, and that's been the transport of choice for high-performance computing and AI. There's been a serious effort by companies like Broadcom and all the major switch vendors to make Ethernet more competitive in the AI space, and the Ultra Ethernet Consortium is one of those efforts. So now NVIDIA has gotten on board.
And I'll just point out that on our October 1st episode of Heavy Strategy, we're talking with Fletcher Previn, who's Cisco's CIO, and he mentioned that Cisco is doing an internal proof of concept of Cisco gear using high-performance Ethernet for AI, and that as he mentions on the show, that they found it performed flawlessly, no dropped packets, no problems whatsoever. So I think it smells like NVIDIA here is kind of just bending to the inexorable, which is never bet against Ethernet. At the very least, Ethernet will be a player in, AI data centers going forward, and quite possibly could actually end up dominating for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, so NVIDIA, we should also note, does have Ethernet in its portfolio through an acquisition. So obviously, if they've got Ethernet and that could sell, it makes sense for them to get on board and be like, sure, we'll sell you whatever. Just buy the GPUs. You can.
if that's where the the momentum is going, they're wise to follow it. And I think we've said on previous episodes, never bet against Ethernet. And in fact, speaking of other episodes, we have a great episode coming out next week with Russ White and Heavy Strategy, where we talk about why protocols succeed and why protocols fail. And I think we mentioned there also never bet against Ethernet for all sorts of reasons.
Sure, and never bet against Russ White. That should be a good show.
Yes.
Moving on, a county council in Dublin, Ireland recently shot down a Google request to build a new data center in an area where the search giant already has existing facilities. The request was denied because of insufficient capacity in the electric grid and a lack of renewable power sources at the site. I think this is significant because for years, Ireland welcomed tech companies to its shores, partly to help revitalize its economy and create good jobs in the IT sector. So I feel like this no vote is telling. Ireland, and like other countries here in the U.S., it's happening too. We're running up against resource limits, frankly. And also as an EU member, Ireland has carbon restriction goals they have to meet, and these goals are going to be harder to achieve because hyperscalers who are binging on power-hungry AI infrastructure are going in the opposite direction.
Well, and I'm just hoping that Google, that I'm not the first to notice this, that Google has already thought about this, but they might consider just moving a couple 100 miles north in the North Atlantic and putting their data center facilities in Iceland, which has an almost unlimited supply of renewable electricity. In fact, little known fact, one of the top 3 industries in Iceland is aluminum smelting because of the power that they have there. The geothermal supplies almost, I want to say 98% of their electricity and an enormous amount of their heating. In fact, houses in Iceland don't have boilers for hot water. You just sort of stick your pipe down into the ground and out comes the hot water. But it's also very useful for renewable energy. So if they want to stay in the same general area, Google can certainly do that and just move a couple 100 miles to the north.
That's an interesting idea. I don't know what the issues are with building in Iceland in terms of, restrictions on building, available land, having the population there to actually support data centers. But it is, a great idea. In fact, because Google issued a report recently saying that its own carbon emissions rose by 48%, primarily due to increased data center energy. So being able to tap into geothermal as a power source, if that's sufficient for running a data center, could be a great idea.
Well, and actually, they don't have too many restrictions. They have a ton of available land. The one thing, and their population is growing a little more faster than they want it to because they've been taking in a lot of immigrants who are eager to work, by the way. The one thing you didn't mention is perhaps something that may be giving Google pause, which is volcanoes. They keep having volcanic eruptions.
Yes. Geologic instability is maybe an issue for your data center.
Kind of just a bit. But, aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the show? Right. Definitely something to consider. That was kind of the first thing that popped into my head the last time I was there is, gosh, I wonder why there aren't more data centers here.
Having to incorporate earthquakes or lava into your resiliency planning is probably new for Google. The other thing I want to say is, I think for IT pros, this may be sort of a very leading indicator that the cloud may not be an unlimited resource. It is tied to finite resources like electricity, like carbon restrictions. So just something to get into your thinking that there may be at some point potential scarcity in some regions when you're planning public cloud or AI strategies over the next few years.
Well, and in fact, Drew, I think there are finance folks who've already just basically made the assumption that, cloud services are effectively resale of electricity with a value-added bump in the middle, because that's basically the way to model them. And moving from the improbable to the outlandish, quite literally, we have our space networking. Boeing just recently announced that it is planning to launch in 2026 a satellite dubbed the mellifluous name Q4S, which is designed to demonstrate quantum entanglement swapping capabilities in orbit. So in other words, quantum entanglement in space for networking. And in fact, the Boeing spokesman said, by demonstrating entanglement swapping, we can create a scalable network where quantum information can be transmitted over vast distances, something currently limited by decoherence and loss. I just want to highlight a couple things since my graduate work was, in fact, in particle physics, so I have a more than passing familiarity with quantum physics. Quantum entanglement is actually a thing. Quantum entanglement for networking is a thing. There is a commercial company called Aliro Networking that actually, I think it's Aliro Quantum Networking that has a quantum network up and running, quantum entanglement-based network up and running, I believe, but don't quote me on this, that it's in Nashville. Now, this one is over fiber optics. So the news here is, of course, that this is all happening in free space, which it has even fewer limitations than optical fiber. So it should be very interesting to see how this evolves.
So I have a very, very, very shallow understanding of quantum mechanics, but what I think I know about quantum entanglement is if you take, I guess, two atoms and put them near each other, and then you separate the atoms and you make a change to one atom, it'll make the same change to the other atom despite the distance between them.
Correct. Substitute particle for atom, and you've nailed it.
Particle, okay.
Now, the other thing that just recently was proven, and it's a fun story how it was proven by a bunch of computer scientists, not quantum physicists, is that quantum entanglement stops functioning once you get above a certain temperature, which is incredibly low. So here's the other advantage to doing all this in space is it's really freaking cold, or it becomes freaking cold very quickly. So this is actually really kind of an interesting area for expansion, because that's probably the best possible place. Space is the best possible place to be doing quantum entanglement for networking, because otherwise you have to, you start using an awful lot of power to cool things down to a level where it functions. And I just have to tell you, the side note is too funny. There was a group of computer scientists led by a scientist at Berkeley who were trying to prove something entirely differently, and they got scooped by a different scientific group. And they were disappointed, but they reached out to the guys at the other group and said, hey, could you have a look at our work and see what you think? And when they reviewed it, they found this one step in an interim proof. And they said, well, look, you just proved something incredibly important in quantum physics.
Whoops.
So it's like,
we missed that.
But yes, we missed that. Yes, because they were computer scientists, not quantum physicists. And the physicists were all excited, like, forget what we proved. Look what you proved. So co-opetition at its best.
Yeah, that must have been nice for the computer scientists.
Yes.
So, and just there's a lot of quantum being thrown around now in the IT space. Quantum entanglement is different from quantum computing and quantum encryption?
Yes. Actually, the big way to look at it is, sort of broadly speaking, the commercial quantum is what I call it. Commercial quantum encompasses quantum computing, which is a whole specific area, which is hardware and software hardware that uses quantum techniques and software that emulates quantum techniques in order to run various flavors of computing problems. Then there's quantum networking, which is what we're talking about here, which is often based on quantum entanglement. Mm-hmm. Then there's quantum cryptography, which is usually based on quantum entanglement, but for a different reason. And then there's also quantum sensing, which, again, sometimes depends on quantum entanglement. So weirdly, quantum entanglement is key for networking, sensing, and cryptography, but not so much for quantum computing.
Okay.
Got that straight?
I think so. Well, it's cool to see, Boeing, which has definitely had some bad news of late in terms of their engineering quality, still having some ambition in the organization.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, they've been having such a slate of bad news that it's good to see good news, and I hope they're successful with it. But obviously, 2026 is a ways away yet.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I guess I don't have to worry about the security implications of quantum entanglement at this point.
Well, actually you do, but that's a whole different episode, Drew.
When can I not worry about things?
Never. But if you continue to optimize your spending, you will at least have some money in your pocket.
That's right. As I will. All right, that wraps up our news. Jana, where can folks get more from you?
You can hit me up at nemertes.com. That's NEMERTES.com. I'd love to hear from you.
And I'm Drew Connery-Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at Drew_CM. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm blogging at packetpushers.net. Thanks to our sponsor, AutoCon. I do hope you sign up and get a chance to go. It's a great conference. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Network Break. If you like the show, leave us a recommendation on Apple Podcasts. Share a link with a friend. And as always, you can send us comments, corrections, or kudos at packetpushers.net/FU. We do take all follow-up seriously, so please reach out. As always, thanks for listening.